what's happening in federal parliament as it returns from its winter break today.
This week, with another showdown looming between Labor and the Greens over the one bill that the government has so far failed to pass.
The PM isn't ruling out using the stalemate as a trigger for an early election.
It has felt like a particularly long winter break for federal parliament this year. A rare pause in the seemingly relentless crises of natural disaster and pandemic and elections saw more politicians than normal clock out and head overseas and away from the news cycle. That has just made the return to Canberra today all the more frenetic. The Prime Minister's move on Friday to float an early election trigger saw the government struggling to get the conversation off election speculation and back onto the substantive issue of housing policy. But the coalition had its own problems. This story in The Australian this morning, which predicted that Peter Dutton would pledge to overturn the budget's increase in the base rate for the unemployment benefit job seeker, sent the morning news cycle off into a spin.
PM, there's a bit of a battle emerging over job seeker. The Libs are going to announce today that they're going to oppose that.
If the safety net bill does not pass this sitting, this fortnight, there won't be an increase in payments be able to be made by September 20. So this is just madness.
The opposition leader Peter Dutton has already signalled that the coalition will not support the increase in job seeker.
But a few hours later, the opposition leader emerged after 2 weeks' leave to say the coalition would support the increase if their alternative was defeated.
The amendment won't get up because we don't have the numbers, and ultimately, if that goes down, as we suspect it will, unfortunately, because I think it's a good policy, then we'll support the government's increase to the $40. So we've been clear about that.
Would you repeal it if you win the election?
No.
The opposition leader has been under pressure over allegations that, as Home Affairs Minister, he had been briefed in 2018 of an AFP investigation into allegations of bribery involving a person whose company was providing services to the offshore detention centre in Nauru. The government renewed its contract with an associated company the following month.
As Minister, I had no involvement whatsoever in relation to the contract negotiations, the execution of the agreements, and that's true for all of the predecessors back to 2012. But obviously the government's playing games here. I'm very happy to co-sign a letter today with the Prime Minister referring these matters to the Integrity Commission.
This afternoon, Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neill announced that Dennis Richardson would conduct a review into her own department. She said serious issues that emerged in recent weeks required a detailed and thorough investigation. Richardson, a former head of Defence, Foreign Affairs and Trade and ASIO, will consider any current and historic integrity issues relating to contracts and systems for managing offshore processing. He has also been asked to make recommendations to ensure Home Affairs processes and systems, quote, meet Australian standards for propriety and probity, and to make referrals to appropriate authorities for further investigation where necessary. But while the day in Parliament House was marked by the usual political sparring, questions had all been conducted under the shadow of foreboding flowing from events over the weekend.
The nature of the activities which are being undertaken in the Whitsundays have transferred from being ones of search and rescue to an activity of recovery.
The Australians we mourn today were taking part in Exercise Talisman Sabre, an unprecedented display of strategic cooperation and coordination driven by a common determination to preserve peace and security. This was the noble ideal that these 4 Australians volunteered to serve, uphold and defend. We mourn them, we will remember them, lest we forget.
It is important that the country hears a very unified message from the government and from the opposition on dark days for our country.
But much of the grist of question time concerned the issue that is front and centre for most Australians, the cost of living.
Will this Prime Minister admit that Australian families and small businesses are worse off now than when his government was elected?
Last week we had the figures of 0.8% CPI increase in the June quarter. Now, we would like to see that moderate further, but we acknowledge the fact that that is a moderation compared with where it has been, and certainly compared with the 2.1% that we inherited. But we do have a plan to combat inflation.
While the government is fighting inflation, the former government was fighting another assault on its reputation. Shortly after question time, former Prime Minister Scott Morrison rose to reject the findings of the Robodebt Royal Commission.
I do, however, completely reject the Commission's adverse findings in the published report regarding my own role as Minister for Social Services between December 2014 and September 2015 as disproportionate, wrong, unsubstantiated and contradicted by clear evidence presented to the Commission. This campaign of political lynching has once again included the weaponisation of a quasi-legal process to launder the government's political vindictiveness. They need to move on.
However, there remains no word from the former Prime Minister about his own plans to move on, despite increasing restlessness from his colleagues that he do so.